In the summer of 1492, Palos de la Frontera was not a prominent strategic port for Castile, nor could it compare to the renowned maritime hub of Lisbon. This coastal town sustained itself through established trade routes with the Canary Islands and traditional fishing. Yet, at that fateful moment, it became the focal point of an event beyond the wildest imagination of its local inhabitants, fully comprehended. At the dock, 3 ships were ready to set sail. They weren't ostentatious in size or appearance. Their wooden hulls were darkened by the corrosive effects of sea salt and the wear of time. Their sails were patched from countless previous voyages, and their decks were cluttered with barrels, coiled ropes, and numerous nautical instruments. Clearly, these were utilitarian vessels, built for hard work. They were not magnificent warships built to glorify, and that very fact made the upcoming journey all the more unpredictable. They would soon disappear over the horizon, venturing deep into a vast ocean, a place that, for most contemporaries, was not a route for exploration, but an inviolable boundary. Today, on Engine History, we will explore the true structure and function of these 3 ships, and analyze why this voyage had the power to permanently change the course of the world. Christopher Columbus had a royally approved proposal, but that didn't mean the Catholic monarchs had a formidable fleet ready for him to conquer the ocean. In 1492, the Kingdom of Castile did not maintain a standing navy, with specialized warships always ready for orders. When the monarchy needed ships for a specific campaign, they typically had to utilize existing resources in the ports. Privately owned vessels, merchant ships, and individual owners' caravels were all mobilized to serve this exploratory mission through charter agreements or, in some situations, by forced requisition. And it was here that a crucial factor emerged, explaining precisely why everything began in Palos. The town had been under a long-standing royal penalty. Under the terms of that penalty, the town was obligated to provide the crown with 2 caravels for a year, ready for any requested mission. This decree created the legal means for Columbus to access maritime vessels, without having to incur acquisition costs. However, possessing the legal right to requisition ships did not mean having a ready-made crew of skilled sailors ready to set sail. This is where the Pinzón brothers entered the picture. Martín Alonso Pinzón and Vicente Yáñez Pinzón were not merely ship owners, but also powerful figures in the local maritime industry, seasoned Atlantic navigators with extensive experience on voyages to Guinea and the Canaries, possessing financial resources, a wide network of connections, and solid reputations. As soon as they committed, the expedition immediately transformed from a vague proposal by a foreigner into a fully viable mission. They directly recruited the crew, supplemented the necessary finances, and took command of 2 of the caravels. Without the intervention of the Pinzón brothers, Columbus might have remained with just a royal license, while not a single ship could have left port. When we refer to the Santa Maria, La Pinta, and La Niña, we often tend to imagine them as mighty warships belonging to a national navy. However, the technical reality shows that these were entirely privately owned maritime vessels. The Santa Maria, a massive merchant ship owned by Juan de la Cosa, was incorporated into the royal expedition, with Cosa himself serving as captain. In a pivotal role, Cosa was not only a skilled navigator and cartographer, but also the chief engineer, ensuring all technical operations of the ship. Notably, this was not a warship or a dedicated exploration vessel. In fact, it was a cargo ship, specially modified for this voyage. Meanwhile, the Pinta, closely associated with the Pinzón family, was directly commanded by Martín Alonso Pinzón. And the Niña, originally named Santa Clara, was owned by the Niño family of Moguer and commanded by Vicente Yáñez Pinzón. This shows that the expedition was a complex combination of many factors, from the power and legal patronage of the monarchy to Columbus's vision and leadership, along with capital, ships, and invaluable seafaring experience from local sailors. This was a characteristic organizational model of the 15th century, completely different from the modern concept of a national fleet, making this voyage even more remarkable. Surprisingly, the Santa Maria was not the most superior ship in the fleet. It did not possess superior speed or the most agile maneuverability. However, with its superior size and maximum cargo capacity, it naturally became the flagship of the expedition. Its hold was filled with provisions sufficient for many months, along with large water barrels, wine, hardtack, salted meat, vegetable oil, vinegar, dried beans, and essential carpentry tools, along with rigging spare parts, spare sails, and all essential supplies to carry out repairs on the other two ships if any issues arose. In modern terms, the Santa Maria was the mobile logistics depot for the entire expedition. Its owner, Juan de la Cosa, was not just an ordinary passenger. He bore the vital technical responsibility, ensuring the ship could endure this arduous journey. And many years later, he himself would become the first to draw a world map, documenting the new lands discovered from this expedition. The Pinta and Niña, however, possessed entirely different characteristics. They were more compact, lighter, and featured sleek, sharp hull designs. As a result, they responded more keenly to the rudder and were capable of agile, swift movement. The Pinta, under the command of Martín Alonso Pinzón, stood out as the fastest of the three ships, often leading the formation to scout for signs of land. Meanwhile, the Niña, commanded by Vicente Yáñez Pinzón, was considered the most seaworthy ship, demonstrating optimal performance on the vast ocean even in harsh weather. The strategic coordination between a large Now-type ship and two lighter caravels proved to be a crucial choice. The Now provided logistical self-sufficiency and immense cargo capacity, while the smaller caravels offered superior speed, reconnaissance capabilities, and maneuverability. The 15th century shipbuilding process began with laying the keel, a longitudinal component serving as the main backbone. From there, the ship's frames were erected, forming the structural framework for the entire hull. Next, the outer planking was installed, and between each seam, oakum was tightly packed, then sealed with molten pitch. This process, known as caulking, was the decisive factor between a ship that could float and one that constantly faced leaks, because, inherently, no ship can be entirely watertight. In reality, the concept of a completely waterproof hull was unthinkable. The ship's interior was always damp, and the operation of bilge pumps was a ceaseless task. A voyage at sea, after all, was a continuous battle to keep the ship afloat. Navigation techniques at the time, though advanced, still had many limitations. The compass played a crucial role, helping maintain direction even when no visible landmarks were present. Latitude was determined by observing the sun's altitude using instruments like quadrants or astrolabes. However, taking these measurements on a pitching and rolling ship's deck inevitably led to unavoidable errors. Loading was entirely impossible to determine without an accurate timekeeping device. Therefore, sailors had to rely on dead reckoning, calculating the distance traveled based on the ship's speed and the duration of the voyage. This was a process demanding extensive experience and iron discipline from the navigator, who had to meticulously record the course and calculations daily. On August 3, 1492, weighing anchor and departing from the port of Palos was not merely a maritime activity, but also strict adherence to a royal decree. The town was responsible for providing ships, and many sailors had to board because they belonged to that maritime community, compelled to obey the royal mandate. This was not an expedition, composed solely of enthusiastic volunteers. In reality, it was a complex blend of duty, opportunity, and local official directives. The bells from St. George's Church rang out as the ships glided down the Tinto River, heading straight for the Atlantic Ocean. From that moment, they left behind not only the coast, but also the navigation method that had shaped maritime life for centuries, always hugging the shore. The first few days passed with surprising tranquility. The trade winds blew steadily, and the sea surface was perfectly calm. The sails remained full for hours without any adjustments, allowing the navigators to maintain their course with a stability that on any other voyage would have been considered a rare stroke of luck. Yet, in the heart of the Atlantic, this ease harbored an ominous foreboding. The easier it was to sail further west, the more arduous the return journey would become. Sailors had learned this through bitter experience. Sailing against the wind for weeks on end, with a heavily laden ship and an exhausted crew could turn the homeward voyage into an impossible task. The horizon was no longer a promise, but transformed into an endless repetition. Still the blue of the ocean, still the rhythm of the sails, still the familiar creaking sound of the ship's timber. Time at sea began to be measured differently, no longer by days, but by watches. Hourglasses were the tools that marked these shifts, and each time they were flipped, a familiar cycle of work resumed, meticulously checking the course, adjusting the ropes, and constantly observing the sea surface for any signs of change. Meanwhile, in the captain's cabin, Columbus diligently recorded the distance traveled, adjusted the course, and closely monitored the compass's operation. It was during these days that the compass needle began to show an unusual deviation, causing deep concern among the navigators. For men accustomed to entrusting their lives to the instrument's accuracy, that slight deflection was an alarming sign, indicating they were entering waters where even the known rules of navigation were beginning to change. And the easier it was to sail further west, the more apparent the core problem of the expedition became. Every mile gained pushed the possibility of return further away, severely threatening the maintenance of discipline. Columbus implemented a unique leadership strategy. He maintained 2 parallel logbooks for distance, one of which contained the actual navigational parameters used for precise course calculations. The second logbook, with adjusted, reduced distance parameters, was made public to the crew. This wasn't merely a deception, but a strategic psychological control tool designed to maintain morale. In the endless expanse of the ocean, where the perception of distance could ignite fear, every afternoon the navigators would gather, performing complex measurements and calculations to precisely determine the distance traveled. The crew anxiously observed, trying to decipher information from subtle gestures, announced figures, and fragmented conversations. They yearned to know the remaining distance, but the real question deep in their minds was there still a way back? Columbus understood that ultimate power at sea depended not just on rank, but on the ability to maintain unwavering trust. And that trust was reinforced by providing navigational parameters acceptable to the crew. Because on an uncharted voyage without sight of land, distance was no longer an objective geographical parameter, but transformed into a direct measure of fear. And then the first signs began to mysteriously appear. It began with a change in bird behavior. They no longer flew out to sea at night. Then came the appearance of floating twigs, pieces of vegetation seemingly carried by coastal currents near land. Next was the appearance of the giant sargassum fields characteristic of the Sargasso Sea, covering the water with an eerie stillness. Each of these signs created an intense effect, a sudden surge of hope. The sailors began to buzz about nearby land, excitedly pointing towards the horizon. They envisioned a triumphant end to the voyage, but the horizon remained utterly empty. And as night fell without any sign of land, the pervasive silence became heavy, more oppressive than any storm. The repetitive cycle of hope, expectation, and then disappointment terribly eroded the crew's morale, far beyond physical exhaustion. By early October, the level of tension had reached a dangerous peak. Conversations were no longer hushed whispers. Sailors openly discussed turning back, not because they lacked faith in their navigational skills, but because they realized the ship was entering an area of the ocean from which no successful voyage had ever returned. At that extremely tense moment, Martín Alonso Pinzón's role was decisive. He was a deeply respected figure, possessing real authority within the crew. When he firmly advocated for continuing the voyage, many sailors agreed to proceed. It wasn't an eloquent speech or a threat, but the sheer weight of his extensive Atlantic seafaring experience. Columbus held official command, but Pinzón commanded the absolute trust of the crew, and it was this delicate balance of power that saved the expedition from an immediate end. The dawn of October 12 broke the extreme tension that had built up over weeks. From the Pinta's crow's nest, Rodrigo de Triana spotted a faint dark line appearing on the horizon. It wasn't an immediate explosion of celebration. First came pervasive skepticism, then careful confirmation, and finally, an outburst of cheers, ending. More than a month of seeing no sign of land, They had set foot on an island in the Bahamas. Months later, during a detailed exploration of Hispaniola's coast, the Santa Maria tragically ran aground on Christmas Eve. The cause was not a fierce storm or a brutal naval battle, but a serious human operational error in unfamiliar waters. The flagship was, after being dismantled, its timber was used to build Fort La Navidad, the first European outpost in the New World. The caravel ships, with their lightweight design and superior seafaring capabilities, were the vessels that would return to Europe, carrying groundbreaking news. The return of the Niña and Pinta transformed the voyage from a mere expedition into a monumental historical milestone. From that fateful moment, the Atlantic Ocean was no longer a barrier, but became a strategic maritime corridor. Ports eagerly prepared for transatlantic voyages, while shipyards rapidly adjusted their design techniques. And European monarchies realized that the world was much larger and geographically more accessible than they had ever imagined. However, this newfound connection demanded an immediate price. Diseases spread in humanity's footsteps, and mechanisms of conquest were brutally deployed, permanently altering Caribbean social structures. All of this originated from 3 ships, made of wood, not originally designed to explore a continent. And that is the deepest meaning of this voyage. If you enjoy stories where technical, maritime, and historical elements intertwine, explaining how we shaped the modern world we live in today, please like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out. Join us for the next exploration.